The city lights sparkled like stars as he sat by the window on the 42nd floor, alone in a corner office built with glass and silence. It was Christmas Eve. The streets below were alive, families laughing, kids running with wrapped gifts, lovers holding hands. But up here it was quiet. No music, no voices. Just the hum of electronics and the soft ticking of a designer watch. He had it all: millions in the bank, a penthouse overlooking the skyline, a fleet of cars, his name in business, magazines. But right now, all he felt was empty. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the edge of his desk. His reflection stared back at him from the dark glass. Sharp suit, polished shoes, the look of power. But the eyes told a different story. They looked tired, distant, hollow. His phone buzzed again, another business call from Tokyo. He didn't answer. For the first time in years, he chose not to. What was the point? Everyone who called wanted something. No one ever just called to ask, "How are you?" He stood up slowly, removed his tie, and let it fall on the desk. The office, once a symbol of everything he'd worked for, now felt more like a cage, a very expensive one. He walked toward the large window again and pressed his hand to the cold glass. Below, cars passed, people rushed, Christmas trees glowed. In the windows of homes he would never step into. Everyone had somewhere to be tonight. Everyone but him. He reached for a framed photo near his keyboard. It was old, slightly faded, a little girl on his shoulders, both of them laughing. Her front teeth were missing, and she wore a paper crown from a birthday party. He remembered that day. County fair, cotton candy, her tiny fingers sticky from ice cream as she held his hand. "Promise you'll always be here, Daddy," she'd whispered while he tucked her in that night. He had smiled and said yes. That was the first promise he ever broke. He closed his eyes, holding the picture tightly. She was grown now, married, living on the other side of the country. She called sometimes, but the words always felt careful, distant. "How's work, Dad?" "Busy," he'd say, and then silence. He had tried to fix it before, but it always felt like he was too late. Like the door had quietly closed without him realizing. He couldn't sit in that office any longer. He grabbed his coat and stepped into the elevator. The descent was smooth, silent, the kind that made your ears pop if you weren't paying attention. As the numbers dropped, so did the weight on his chest. Not much, but enough. At the lobby, the old security guard looked up, surprised. "Leaving early tonight, sir?" "Merry Christmas," he replied, unsure if the words sounded real or forced. Guard smiled. "Merry Christmas to you too. Hope you have somewhere warm to be." He nodded but didn't answer. Saying the truth would make it real. When he stepped outside, the cold air hit him hard. It smelled like snow and roasted peanuts from a nearby cart. The sidewalks were full, kids in puffy jackets, people carrying shopping bags, a man dressed, a Santa ringing a bell. It all felt distant, like a holiday movie playing in a world he no longer belonged to. He started walking. No destination. Just away. Away from the office. Away from his choices. His steps echoed against the pavement, each one sharper than the last. He passed by a church where a choir sang Silent Night. He stopped for a moment and listened, but it didn't reach his heart the way it used to dot at the corner near a busy store. A man sat on a blanket holding a sign. "Anything helps. God bless." Without thinking, he pulled out his wallet and handed over a crisp $100 bill. The man looked up in shock. "Thank you, sir. Merry Christmas." He nodded. Merry Christmas. But even after that, the hollow feeling stayed. Giving money was easy. Giving time, love, presents, that was the part he had forgotten how to do. He kept walking. Soon, the city lights faded behind him. The streets narrowed. He found himself in a quiet neighborhood, old brick buildings, small balconies with lights, windows filled with decorations clearly made by children. Something about this place felt different, softer, warmer, real. Down the block, he saw a small park. A few kids were still playing in the snow under the soft glow of streetlights. Parents sat on benches, huddled in blankets, holding warm drinks, He slowed down, watching them. There was laughter, joy, life. He didn't know why he stopped. Maybe it was the girl trying to build a snowman that wouldn't stay up. Maybe it was the way her parents looked at her with pride, not impatience. Maybe it was the simple peace that wrapped around this little corner of the world. He found a bench on the edge of the park and sat down, still dressed in his expensive coat, shoes too shiny for snow. No one noticed him. And yet, for the first time in a long while, he noticed them, and without even knowing it, something in his life had already begun to change. The snow crunched softly under the boots of children playing nearby. From the bench, he watched them some, throwing snowballs, others trying to make angels on the ground. A couple of teenagers were laughing loudly, one of them slipping and landing in a pile of snow, while the others howled with laughter. It was messy and chaotic and full of life. He hadn't felt part of something like this in years. He rubbed his gloved hands together, trying to keep warm. His coat was made from the finest wool money could buy, yet it did little to shield him from the cold that came from inside. It was a kind of cold that luxury couldn't fix. He leaned back against the bench and looked up. The sky was gray and soft, like it might snow again soon. Somewhere in the distance, bells jingled faintly. Probably from a passing sleigh ride or a corner Santa. The whole city was alive with the kind of joy that didn't come from wealth or success. It came from being together. Then he saw her. A little girl in a red puffer jacket with 2 long black pigtails was trying again and again to build a snowman. She was small, maybe 6 or 7, and the snow just wouldn't stick. Each time she tried, it crumbled in her hands, but she didn't give up. Her small mittens were wet, her cheeks red, her eyebrows scrunched in frustration, but she kept going. He smiled. Just a little. From a distance, her parents were sitting on a faded blanket spread out on the snowy grass. The mother poured something from a thermos, probably hot chocolate, and handed it to the father. They looked tired but content, sharing smiles and holding hands inside wool gloves. The little girl tried again. This time, she packed the snow tighter. It stayed together for a moment before breaking apart. She let out a small sigh and looked around, clearly annoyed. That's when her eyes landed on him. At first, he expected her to look away or run back to her parents like most children would. But she didn't. She tilted her head, curious. Then she walked over to him just like that. No fear, no hesitation. Just the calm confidence that kids sometimes have when they see something others miss. She stopped in front of him and looked up. "Are you sad?" she asked. He blinked, surprised. "What makes you say that?" "You look lonely," she said, with complete honesty. "Like my teddy bear when I forget to bring him to bed." He chuckled, caught off guard. "That's very observant. Are you?" she asked again, climbing up on the bench beside him without being invited. "Lonely, I mean." He thought about lying, but the truth was too heavy to hide tonight. "Yeah, I guess I am." She nodded like she understood more than he expected. "It's not good to be lonely on Christmas." "That's what my mom says." "That's very wise." "I'm wise," she agreed seriously, pulling her knees up under her coat. "I read books, lots of books. What's your name?" "Sophia. What's yours?" He hesitated. It felt strange to be asked something so simple. "You can call me Will." Sophia studied him for a moment. "Okay, Will." Across the park, her mother called out, "Sophia, don't bother the man." "She's not bothering me," he called back without thinking. The mother looked surprised, then got up with the father and walked over. They were young, maybe in their early 30s. The man had paint on his jacket. The woman had soft eyes and a gentle smile. "I'm sorry," the woman said. "She doesn't usually talk to strangers." "She's fine," he said. "Really, we were just talking about snowmen and teddy bears." "I'm Maria," she said, offering a gloved hand. "This is David and Sophia, of course." "I'm Will," he said, shaking their hands. "Well, Will," David said kindly. "Thanks for keeping her company." "She's quite the talker." "She's honest," Will said. That's rare. There was an awkward pause. These weren't people from his world. And yet, they made him feel more seen in 2 minutes than most boardrooms had in 20 years. Do you have a family around here? Maria asked gently. Will shook his head. Not anymore. I'm sorry. Sophia looked up at him again. Are you all alone on Christmas? He didn't answer right away. Her voice was soft, but the question hit like a punch. Yes, he finally said. I am. Sophia looked at her parents. Can he come to dinner with us? Sweetheart, Maria said, clearly surprised. Sophia looked at her father. He's lonely and we have food. Will tried to speak. It's kind of you, but Maria looked at David. They exchanged a glance that said a lot without words. Then Maria nodded. If you'd like to join us, she said slowly, you're welcome. Will blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. Really? It's Christmas, David said. No one should eat alone. Sophia beamed. Yay! Will looked at them, at the girl, then back at the snowy park. A bench was no place to be on a night like this. Okay, he said, voice quiet. Thank you. Sophia jumped off the bench and reached for his hand. Come on, dinner's gonna be good. And just like that, a door he didn't know he needed opened. He didn't know what would happen next. But something told him it was going to matter. They crossed the street together, the snow crunching under their feet. Sophia held tightly to Will's hand like they'd known each other forever. Her small fingers were warm inside her mittens, and she swung their hands back and forth as if this were the most normal thing in the world. Will hadn't held anyone's hand in years not like this. Not without it meaning a contract or a deal or a goodbye. Maria and David walked just ahead, guiding them to the old apartment building that sat at the corner of the block. Lights twinkled in the windows. Paper snowflakes were taped to the glass. The lobby was small but filled with warmth, real warmth, not just from the heaters, but from the feeling that people lived here, laughed here, cried here. It felt lived in and alive. As they walked up the stairs, 3 long flights, Will's shoes echoed loudly in the hallway. His coat was too clean, his watch too shiny, and his presence didn't match the building. But no one said anything. No one judged. When they reached apartment 3B, David pulled out a key and opened the door. Home sweet home, he said, holding the door open. The inside was small, just a living room, a kitchen the size of a walk-in closet, and a hallway leading to what looked like 2 bedrooms. But it was filled with life. Mismatched furniture sat under a wall of photos. The couch had a patch sewn into one corner. The coffee table had marker stains and a missing leg, propped up by a book. And the kitchen smelled like something warm, something real, something that came from love. Not luxury. Sophia tossed off her boots and coat and ran straight to the corner of the room where a small, slightly crooked Christmas tree stood proudly. Its branches held handmade ornaments, little drawings, paper stars, and a few blinking lights that flickered every few seconds. She turned and pointed at the fridge, where more of her drawings covered the surface. That's my art wall, she said proudly. Will smiled. You're quite the artist. Thank you, she said, her eyes lighting up. I draw better when I'm happy. Maria slipped into the kitchen and started preparing dinner. David helped Sophia wash her hands and change into clean clothes. Will stood awkwardly in the middle of the room, unsure where to sit, unsure what to say. You can relax, Maria called from the kitchen. You're our guest. He took a seat on the couch, still feeling like an intruder in a story that wasn't his. But the more he looked around, the more he felt something he couldn't name. It wasn't just the smell of food or the soft hum of a radio playing carols. It was the feeling of being seen. Not for his money, not for his job. Just as a person. Just as a man who had shown up, needing something he couldn't buy. Sophia returned and sat beside him, wiping her damp hands on her pants. She pointed to a framed photo on the shelf above the couch. That's me at my baptism. Mom says God was there that day, even though we couldn't see him. Will looked at the photo. She was wearing a white dress, her hair in tiny curls. Family, surrounded her, all smiling. Do you think he was? He asked gently. Sophia nodded. I think he's everywhere. Like in snowflakes, in warm hugs, and in the feeling when someone lets you sit on their bench. Will felt something catch in his throat. He nodded. Maybe you're right. Dinner is ready, Maria announced. The table was already set. Not with fancy dishes or silverware, but with worn plates, cloth napkins with tiny embroidered flowers, and a pot roast in the center that smelled like heaven. There were mashed potatoes, green beans, and homemade rolls. Will hadn't eaten food. Like this in... He couldn't even remember. They sat down together. David reached out his hands. Maria followed. Sophia did too. Will hesitated, but then, quietly, he joined them. Let's say grace, David said. Dear Lord, thank you for this food, for our family, and for our new friend who joins us tonight. Remind us that the best gifts aren't bought, they're shared. Amen. Amen, Sophia echoed. Dinner was quiet at first. Will didn't know what to say. But Maria asked about his childhood. He told them about a small-town grocery store his parents used to run, about how he used to sweep the floors on Saturday mornings, about the smell of fresh bread and the sound of the cash register ringing. He didn't talk about the office, or the buildings, or the fortune. None of that seemed important here. When dessert came, a warm apple pie from the local market. Sophia leaned across the table. Do you miss your daughter? She asked gently. Will paused. Every single day. Why don't you visit her? He opened his mouth, closed it again. It's complicated. Sophia tilted her head. That's what grown-ups say when they're scared. David and Maria looked at each other, slightly stunned. Will stared at the little girl, who stared back with the kind of wisdom only children seem to have. And just like that, something inside him cracked open. The room grew quiet after Sophia's words. Her small voice had stirred something that none of them could quite explain. Will didn't speak for a long moment. He stared at the little girl across the table, her eyes filled with innocence and truth. What could he even say? She had seen straight through him like no adult ever had. Maria reached for her daughter's hand gently. Sweetheart, maybe that's not something we should... No, Will interrupted softly. It's okay, she's right. I'm scared. Sophia smiled a little, as if she was glad he told the truth. I'm scared that if I try to fix things, he continued, they'll only break more. That maybe I missed my chance a long time ago, and there's no way to go back. David nodded, slowly looking across the table. Sometimes the only way to find out is to try. Will looked down at his plate. The pie was almost finished, but the feeling in his chest was far from settled. He hadn't felt this kind of warmth in years. Not from food, not from people. It was like sitting at the edge of something bigger than himself, something real. Something that wasn't bought. You should call her, Sophia said quietly. Now. He blinked. Now. It's Christmas Eve, she said. Families are supposed to talk, even if it's scary. Will's hand instinctively went to his coat, hanging on the back of the chair. Inside the pocket, his phone sat cold and heavy. He hadn't called his daughter in over 6 months. She had texted once in October a simple, "Hope you're doing okay." He had replied with a thumbs up. That was it. Maria and David said nothing. They didn't pressure him. They didn't make a sound. But their silence felt supportive. Patient. Will reached into his coat pocket and slowly pulled out the phone. His hands trembled slightly as he scrolled through his contacts. Her name was still there. First name only. He stared at it for a long time. He could hang up before she picked up. He could say he dialed by accident. He could, but instead, he pressed call. It rang once, twice, 3 times. He was just about to end the call when her voice answered. Hello, Dad? Will's breath caught in his throat. She sounded surprised, confused, but not cold. Hi, he said softly. It's me. Is everything okay? I don't know, he admitted. I just wanted to say I love you. There was a pause, a quiet kind of pause. Then her voice broke slightly. I love you too, Dad. Will felt the tightness in his chest to loosen. Something warm filled the space that had been empty for so long. I miss you, he said, voice shaking. More than you know. I miss you too, she replied. I was just talking about you today. John and I were wondering if we should call, but we weren't sure if you'd even answer. Will glanced across the table. Sophia was pretending not to listen, but her eyes sparkled, and she was smiling softly at her pie. I want to talk more, he said. I want to try. I'd like that, his daughter replied. They talked for nearly 20 minutes. About her job, about her husband, about her small apartment in California. He didn't talk about stocks or business or big buildings. He told her about the people he was with, about a little girl who had invited him to dinner like it was the most natural thing in the world. She sounds incredible, his daughter said. She is, Will replied. She reminded me what it means to be brave. When he finally hung up, he realized his eyes were wet, not from sadness, not from regret, from something else. Something he hadn't felt in years. Sophia jumped out of her seat and wrapped her arms around his neck. You did it. Will laughed through the tears. Yeah, I did. Maria reached over and squeezed his hand. David smiled and poured him another cup of warm cider. You know, Will said softly, This has been the best night I've had in decades. You're always welcome here, Maria said. Our table's small, but there's always room for one more. Will looked around the room. At the flickering lights, the drawings on the fridge, the dishes still in the sink. The warmth and the air that had nothing to do with the heater dot, and for the first time in a very long time, he felt something strange and beautiful. He belonged. He didn't know what the next day would bring. But tonight he wasn't alone, and that was everything. The dishes clinked quietly in the sink as Maria hummed a soft melody from the kitchen. David wiped the table clean while Sophia dried each plate with great care, holding them with both hands as if they were made of glass. Will offered to help again, but Maria gently insisted he sit down and rest. You're our guest, she said, smiling. We don't get many of those, so tonight you're not allowed to lift a finger. He chuckled. I'm not used to being told what to do in my own house. But here, I suppose, I'm in better company. Sophia giggled. That's because Mommy's the boss here. That's true, David added with a wink. We just try not to argue about it. Will leaned back on the couch, his eyes drifting across the room. The place was so modest. The furniture worn but clean. A small bookcase held old paperbacks, coloring books, and board games. Family photos covered the walls, birthdays, park picnics, school plays. There was a history here, a life built around moments, not things. He stood and walked over to a photo taped to the fridge. It showed a much younger Maria, holding baby Sophia in a hospital blanket. Her hair was messy. Her eyes were tired. But she was smiling so brightly, it made Will's heart squeeze. That one's from my first day, Maria said softly behind him. She came early, wasn't ready. Neither were we. But she made you ready. Will said double quotes yes. Maria nodded. She taught us fast, and she still teaches us every day. Will turned back to the kitchen. Can I ask you something personal? Sure, Maria said, drying her hands on a towel. How do you do it? This life, the simplicity, the love, the peace. Maria tilted her head slightly, considering his question. I guess we just try not to take anything for granted. We don't have much, but what we do have, we hold on to. We fight for it. We give thanks for it. David nodded from the doorway. We've seen hard times, really hard. But we always had each other. Will leaned against the counter. I used to believe that success would bring happiness. That once I made enough money, everything else would fall into place. He paused. His voice dropped lower. But I chased it so hard. I lost everything that really mattered. My wife, my daughter, myself. Maria walked over and placed a hand on his arm. You haven't lost everything. Will looked into her eyes, and he saw something he hadn't seen in a very long time. Genuine kindness, the kind that doesn't ask for anything in return. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his voice. Do you think people like me can change? Maria smiled gently. You already are. Sophia came running back into the room, now in her pajamas. She held a stuffed bunny and climbed up next to Will on the couch without hesitation. Can I tell you a secret? She whispered. Of course. Pretty to come tonight, she said seriously. I didn't know who, but I told God someone needed us. Will stared at her, speechless. Mom says sometimes when people feel like they're falling apart, they just need someone to catch. Then, he didn't know what to say. This little girl, in her tiny voice, had just said something that reached deeper than any therapist, any book, any award he'd ever received. Thank you, he whispered. You caught me, Sophia grinned, proud of herself. Now you can help catch someone else someday. Later that night, after the dishes were done and the leftovers packed away, the family gathered in the living room. Sophia curled up beside her mom, and David handed Will a warm cup of tea. They sat in a comfortable silence for a while, watching the blinking lights on the crook tree. I never thought I'd be here tonight, Will said, his voice quiet. Not just here in your home. I mean, feeling this warmth, family, hope. You were meant to be here, David said simply. I've spent my whole life building walls, glass towers, guarded emails, fancy contracts, but none of it ever felt like this. Maria nodded. It's easy to build walls, but it takes courage. To open a door. Will looked at Sophia, already dozing off, her stuffed bunny tucked under her chin. I don't want to go back to who I was. Then don't, David said. Start again. Tomorrow. Right now. Maria added, It's never too late, Will. Not when you decide to live differently. For a moment, the room was still. The snow outside had started falling again, covering the street in a soft white blanket. It was quiet. Peaceful. Will looked at the family, 3 people who didn't know his past, didn't care about his title, and didn't ask for anything except conversation and company, and somehow they had given him everything. He sipped the tea and smiled. Tomorrow would be different, because tonight had changed everything. The snow had thickened outside, falling in slow, quiet waves, painting the world in white. From the window, Will watched as the street below grew still, like time had paused just for them. Inside, the apartment was warm. A soft lamp glowed in the corner. The only sounds were the gentle hum of the heater and the quiet breaths of Sophia, who had fallen asleep curled beside her mother on the couch. Will set his empty teacup on the table and looked at David and Maria. They sat across from him, side by side, still dressed in their sweaters from earlier, looking tired but content. It felt like the right moment to speak. Not just about his past, but about the truth, the whole truth. There's something I haven't told you, Will said quietly, his fingers fidgeting with the cuff of his shirt. Maria raised her eyes, curious but calm. David leaned forward, listening. I'm not just in real estate, Will said. That was a half-truth, David smiled faintly. We figured there was more, Will exhaled. I own one of the largest development firms in the city. I've spent the last 20 years building towers, buying land, making deals. The company bears my name. My face is on magazines you probably pass at the grocery store. I've been called a visionary and a power player, but none of that ever made me feel the way I feel here tonight. There was a long pause. Maria didn't speak right away. She looked at him, not through him, but into him, like she was trying to decide if the man sitting in front of her was the same man who had been helping Sophia build a snowman only hours earlier. We didn't ask what you do, Maria said finally. Because what you do isn't who you are. Will stared at her, stunned by how simple and profound that was. I've spent my whole life thinking it was, he said. I thought my value came from what I built, how much I owned, How many? People listened when I spoke. And now? David asked Dot while looked around the room again, the drawings on the fridge, the small bookshelf, the flickering lights on the tree. Then his eyes landed on Sophia, sleeping peacefully, her head resting on Maria's lap. Now I think I got it all wrong. Maria smiled softly. Then maybe this is your second chance. Will nodded slowly. That's what I'm hoping. There was a moment of silence, not awkward, just thoughtful. Then Will leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Can I ask you something personal? Of course, David said. If money wasn't a problem. If you could do anything in the world, what would you do? David looked over at Maria. She seemed surprised by the question, but not uncomfortable. I think, Maria began slowly, I would open a clinic. Here in this neighborhood. I'm a nurse, and every day I see people turned away because they don't have insurance, or they wait too long to get help because they're afraid of the cost. I'd want to change that. Will nodded, his gaze steady. And you? He asked. David. David leaned back, rubbing the back of his neck. I work construction. I see kids in this neighborhood wasting their potential. They get into trouble or drop out because no one's ever shown them another way. I want to start a program for them. Teach them how to build skills, trades, maybe even life lessons. Give them tools for a future. Will sat back in his seat, thinking. His mind was already racing, not with numbers or profit margins, but with ideas that felt new and alive. What if I told you? You could do both? He asked. David blinked. What do you mean? I mean, Will said carefully, what if I backed it, funded it, supported it, not just a donation, a partnership? What if we did it together? Maria looked at him, her mouth slightly open, as if trying to decide whether he was serious. You don't even know us? She said quietly. I didn't, Will said. But I do now. And I've spent 20 years building things that meant nothing. I want to build something that matters. David was speechless. Maria shook her head gently, overwhelmed. I don't understand. Why us? Will looked at her, without blinking. Because tonight, you let a stranger into your home. You fed him. You didn't ask what he could offer or what he had. You just made room. No one's done that for me in a very long time. And because your daughter asked me a question that changed my life. David leaned back in his chair, speechless. Maria wiped a tear from her cheek. Will didn't say anything more. He let the silence hold the weight of the moment. Then Sophia stirred. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes. Is everything okay? She mumbled sleepily. Will smiled gently. Yeah, kiddo. Everything might finally be okay. 6 months later, the neighborhood looked different. Not in the way a skyline changes when a new building goes up, but in the quiet, almost invisible ways that matter more ways you feel before you see. The cracked sidewalk outside the apartment building had been fixed. The small, forgotten lot on the corner, once filled with weeds and trash, was now a garden with benches, flowers, and a sign that read, Community grows here. And just across from the garden, nestled between 2 brick buildings, stood a brand new clinic with white walls, clean glass doors, and a small plaque near the entrance. The Maria Rodriguez Community Health Center. Inside, Maria stood in her scrubs, greeting families as they walked in. There was no front desk line, no questions about insurance, no fear. Just help. Just care. A few blocks away, laughter echoed from an old community hall that had been completely renovated. Inside, David's program, Skills for Success, was filled with teenagers learning to weld, fix bikes, design furniture, and even cook. Some came in lost, some came in angry. But they all left with calloused hands and lifted heads. They were building more than projects. They were building futures, and Will? He was no longer the man in the glass tower. He had sold the penthouse, sold the car collection, even sold the jet. He now lived in a 2-bedroom apartment on the 4th floor of the same building as Maria and David. His space was modest but warm. The kind of place where you could leave your shoes by the door and not worry if they matched the floor. His bookshelf was no longer filled with business awards. It held children's books, photo albums, and a drawing Sophia made that simply read, "We love you, Will." Every Saturday morning, he'd knock on 3B with a fresh bag of groceries and sit at the kitchen table helping Sophia with her homework. Sometimes they read together. Sometimes they baked cookies. Sometimes they just talked about things that didn't involve money or meetings or mistakes. "Do you remember when you were lonely?" Sophia asked him one morning, pencil in hand, chin resting on her palm. "I do," Will said, folding his newspaper. "I remember it very well. Are you still lonely now?" He looked around the small apartment. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon. The sound of Maria humming came from the next room. David was out back helping a neighbor fix a broken heater. The window was open just enough to let in the cool spring breeze. Sophia sat beside him with her homework scattered in front of her. "No," he said, wrapping his arm gently around her. "I'm not lonely anymore." "Good," she said, smiling. "Because you're stuck with us now." He laughed. A deep, honest laugh, the kind he hadn't let out in years. "I wouldn't want it any other way." Later that evening, back in his own apartment, Will sat by the window watching the sun dip below the rooftops. A few kids rode their bikes up and down the street. The sound of a basketball echoed in the distance. It wasn't silent here, but the noise was the kind that filled you, not drained you. His phone buzzed. Emma. He answered quickly. "Hi, sweetheart." Her voice was bright. "Hey, Dad, guess what?" "What's that?" "You're going to be a grandpa." Will froze for a second. Then he leaned forward, eyes wide, heart racing. "Really? Really?" Emma laughed. "John." "And I just found out. We wanted you to be the first to know." He felt his throat tighten. That's the best news I've heard in my life." There was a pause. Then Emma's voice softened. "When the baby comes, would you tell them the story? The one about how you met Sophia?" "About the dinner?" Will smiled, his eyes watering. "I'd love that." "It's a good story," Emma said. "It's a great story." He whispered. After they hung up, Will sat in the quiet for a long time, but it wasn't the empty kind of quiet anymore. It was full of laughter from the apartment below. The scent of something baking across the hall. The muffled voice of someone singing softly out their window. He thought about that night last winter. About the park bench. About the snowman that wouldn't stand. About a little girl who asked one question with no idea how big the answer would become. "Do you want to have dinner with us?" That question had opened a door in him that had been locked. For years, it had pulled him out of a tower made of money and into a life built on meaning. He realized then that he had spent years searching for success, when all he had really wanted was connection. Not the kind you network with, but the kind you sit across the table from, holding hands before dinner, listening, laughing, forgiving. That Christmas dinner had changed everything. And now his life was full of moments he never thought he'd get again. Moments of truth, of second chances, of purpose. Will stood, turned off the lamp, and looked out once more at the quiet, glowing street. Then he said aloud, as if to the little girl who still lived one floor below, "Thank you." And in that small, ordinary moment, Will knew this was what coming home really felt like.